When I was young, there was a pool in the neighborhood, bigger and deeper than any other. I loved the adrenaline rush of diving down to touch the bottom, but swimming on the surface made me uncomfortable. Somehow, I was convinced giant octopuses were watching me from the invisible depths. That experience was not unique. For thousands of years, humans have been fascinated and horrified by deep water. In the imaginary depths, our imagination has gone wild. The sense that something's out there in the deep has done more than terrify us. It has birthed religions, inspired explorers, influenced psychologists, and become an internet phenomenon. This is the story of how our fear of deep water changed the world.
Paths seldom trod.
In 1200 BC, a scribe in the landlocked city of Nineveh finished writing a clay tablet. He had completed a copy of an ancient myth which stretched back thousands of years. The creation story of the Enuma Elish tells how the ancient gods of fresh and salt water came together to birth the first life. Tiamat, the goddess of the primordial ocean, the Shining One, was like a giant sea serpent. Her husband, Abzu, was ended by their children, beginning a war between the new gods and Tiamat. Eventually Tiamat was defeated, but not before she had created more sea monsters. Deep water as a place of creation is part of many cultural traditions, but the Enuma Elish was also the origin point for many stories of sea monsters. In the neighbouring coastal region of Canaan, worshippers of Hadad Baal told of how he defeated Lotan, a coiled sea monster representing chaos and destruction. And that feeling that terrifying creatures could emerge from unknown depths was confirmed by sailors. Himilco of Carthage, who sailed from North Africa up to Britain around 500 BC, reported encountering them during his voyage. Here and there, sea creatures meet, and sea monsters swim amid the ships. It would be tempting to view the weird and wonderful sea creatures of medieval manuscripts as a continuation of this tradition, although these may look like mythical creatures to us now. For many people, the depictions of monsters were accurate representations of real animals. One popular idea was that every land animal had an equivalent in the sea. By the 17th century, pictures of sea monsters had started to disappear from maps. Specimens started being brought back to land to be studied and harvested. The biggest change was the representation of the whale. Once a ferocious sea wolf, the whale was now pictured as a lumbering resource, a storehouse of blubber, meat, and ambergris. And yet, something of the ocean's deep, chaotic magic remained. The fantastical story of Moby Dick reminded readers how dangerous the depths could be, even as they read it by the light of whale oil candles. Let faith oust fact, let fancy oust memory. I look deep down and do believe. Herman Melville's character Starbuck tells us while staring down into the ocean's depths. A decade later, Jules Verne published his novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which aspired to be more fact than faith. Despite this, there are still some strange ideas in the book which Verne had inherited from the past. The giant squid attack on the Nautilus submarine draws on ancient legends which go far back to the Roman writer Pliny, who described how squid-like creatures attack shipwrecked sailors. There is no animal in existence that is more dangerous for its powers of destroying a human being when in the water, embracing his body, It counteracts his struggles and draws him under with its feelers and numerous suckers. More curious is Verne's description of the physics of the deep ocean. Popular science still said that only pure gold could sink to the deepest bottom. Other things floated in the depths, suspended in the dark water. So when the Nautilus encounters a recent shipwreck, the boat and the sailors' bodies hang lifeless in the deep water in a magical yet horrifying way. The depths of Verne's oceans have an imaginary, dreamlike quality. From the Enuma Elish to Jules Verne, the deep ocean represented a kind of dangerous magic in the human imagination. But then this idea began to change. A rift emerged between the imagined ocean and the scientific one, and out of that divide came a new word. 1850 to 1950 was a century of change in the way humans imagined the imaginary depths. As people began tentatively using the word thalassophobia for the first time, two other very important things were happening. The first was the launch of the Challenger expedition in 1872, a key moment in the development of the scientific study of the oceans. On a journey of 120,000 kilometers across a 3-year period, the research ship Challenger catalogued over 4,000 new sea creatures. The ship carried over 200 kilometers of strong rope on board for deep sea soundings. In 1875, in the Pacific Ocean, the crew dropped a weight overboard and measured its descent to a depth of over 8,000 meters. They had discovered part of the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in the ocean. When the Challenger returned, the researchers began publishing their findings. The last volume of the 50-page report was published in 1895. The speculative study of the deep ocean had been transformed into a data-driven scientific endeavor. The second important thing that occurred in this period was that a man called Romain had a religious experience. In 1927, he wrote a letter to his friend telling him about his sensation of limitless, boundless eternity. Perhaps all religions were founded on such an idea. He called this sensation the Oceanic Feeling. Like an ocean, it was boundless and seemed infinite and eternal. Unfortunately for Romain Rolland, his friend was the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. Freud coolly dissected the oceanic feeling. It was nothing more than the vestiges of the primitive ego. Rolland's letter was one of several challenges to Freud's psychoanalysis. The battle was between those who wanted to maintain the existence of some kind of spiritual reality and those, like Freud, who believed a cold academic analysis based on biological drives was sufficient. But it's interesting Rolland chose to defend spirituality on the grounds of oceanic feeling. Although the deep sea had long been a site of magic and spirituality in the human imagination, the findings of the Challenger expedition now seemed to threaten this. Lead weights had been sunk 8 kilometers deep into the sea. Records had been made and studied. One might interpret Rolland's oceanic feeling as an attempt to redeem that sense of spiritual wonder, awe, and fear in the limitless, imaginary depths of the sea, a feeling that now seemed to be under attack. Although Freud rejected Rolland's idea, Carl Jung was more conciliatory. Drawing on ancient myths, Jung saw the ocean as a symbol of chaos and creation. But it was also the representation of the unconscious mind, the site of archetypes and primitive instincts, the location of gods and monsters. Jung redeemed the imaginative deep by making it imaginary. Jung's oceans are not literally the same ones as the Challenger sailed. there was a rift. Two oceans were created, the scientific and the psychological. Psychologists began talking about the unconscious depths of the mind. Consciousness was only on the surface. Bridging the gap between the real and imaginary seas was a new word, Thalassophobia, meaning fear of deep water. Ambassador William Short wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson where he described how I have been endeavouring all the winter to reason away my antipathy to the sea, but I have a kind of thalassophobia that resists all kinds of argument. Short had an illogical fear of the ocean he could only explain as a psychological quirk. In 1896, the psychologist Théodule Armand Ribot listed thalassophobia as one of a series of irrational fears in his book on the psychology of emotions. By the 1950s, the word had become an increasingly common reference to the psychological fear of deep water. It connected the psychological ocean with the real one. A feeling which might have been channeled into an ancient cult or religion was now an irrational quirk. But the story doesn't end there, because, like so many things, thalassophobia changed with the arrival of the internet. It was in the field of fan art that early internet users began deploying the term thalassophobia. But these weren't just pictures of empty blue spaces. Strange creatures lurk in the depths of these oceans. The word became a kind of psychological justification to indulge in sea monster fantasies which had long ago been proven false. With a dedicated subreddit, thalassophobia has become an internet phenomenon, contributing to the success of popular games like Subnautica. One of the earliest thalassophobia images comes from 2003 and seems to show two mermaid-like creatures and possibly a sailor's head, which draws on the darker stories of mer-creatures who drag people down into the depths. A few years earlier, Carl Bantz, the celebrated marine biologist, had written an article titled "Mermaids, Their Biology, Culture and Demise." He playfully imagined that mermaids were real creatures which had mysteriously disappeared in recent years. He pretended to apply the scientific method to their study and analysis. The joke was, of course, that the very scientific method he was applying is what had killed the mermaids. But were the mermaids so dead after all? Certainly not in the virtual world of internet thalassophobia. Nor have they disappeared from the coast of West Africa, where people continue to venerate the spirit Mummy Wata, often depicted as a woman with coiled serpents. Mummy Wata is encountered by chance in a river or coastal zone. She then drags the person down into the deep, where they encounter a paradise-like realm. On returning to the surface, the individual often has a new sense of purpose after this mystical experience. Like the ocean, there is a dark and dangerous side to Mummy Wata, and priests and cults on both sides of the Atlantic worship her. She has not diminished in popularity in the 21st century, and continues to remain a popular spirit, prompting one West African conservation NGO to brand themselves with her name. And the idea that the two oceans, one imaginary and cultural, the other political and scientific, need to be reconnected has become popular. A UN conference for environment and development urged governments and NGOs to integrate scientific analysis with cultural beliefs and customs when managing marine areas. So, is this now the age of the postmodern ocean? Did we get it all wrong trying to rationalize the mystery of the deep sea and reduce it to facts and data? What is certain is that the sensation of thalassophobia isn't going away. Swimming in that murky pool as a child was a terrifying experience, but it was also almost spiritual. an intense memory. We all have a memory of deep water, a dream or swim which cannot be forgotten. The power of deep water to conjure up strong feelings is within us. Whether we channel it into a religious cult, psychoanalysis, internet fan art, or even a conservation project, what we choose to do with it is up to us.
For more videos like this, please like and subscribe to the channel. I wish you a calm and peaceful day.